Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of the Kids Different on Purpose podcast. I am Brittany and I am joined by the lovely Jenna Ryan.
Hi, hello, and welcome to part two. I am really enjoying talking about this topic. And of course, just like last week, we're going to break this up into two parts. So hope you make it here. And if you are coming here from the last episode, welcome back. And if you haven't listened to part one yet, be sure to check that out before you listen here. Quick trigger warning just so that we cover this section as well. So, trigger warnings for sexual assault, mental health, suicide, abortion, and any pregnancy loss. If these are topics that are super sensitive to you, we completely understand. Just make sure to skip this episode and join us on our next.
All right, so to pick up kind of where we left off, we were talking last week about kind of my pregnancy situation and the issues that came up in both of those. But I want to go back and touch base on you a little bit. So we talked last week about you having had the mindset of not having any kids due to medical issues in your career, and you said that has changed within the last year. So can you tell me a little bit about like why you changed your mind and like what went into that and kind of like where you are mentally now on the decision of whether or not you and Dion will have any kids?
So, yeah, to kind of go back into has my mind changed, especially like after meeting Dion and after college, I was very set on not having children. And up until like last year, I felt that way. I felt like I was never going to have kids, that it just wasn't meant for me. And I didn't have like that maternal instinct at all either. I never had that want, you know what I mean? So I had something happen that really, really changed my idea of me wanting to have children. And so about this time last year, I had found out very suddenly that I was pregnant and took the tests and everything. And it was a shock. It was a huge shock because if you listen to part one, I talk a little bit about my medical issues, but just to briefly go over it, I have something called a unicornuate uterus. And basically that means I have half my uterus and I only have one fallopian tube and one communicating ovary. When I was in high school, I had the other fallopian tube taken out. So very difficult for me to get pregnant. So I was shocked, to say the least. So, and it was really early on. I went immediately to a doctor because I knew that it was an issue. And they ended up doing an ultrasound. They found out that I was like 2 or 3 weeks, but it was in my fallopian tube. So it was an ectopic pregnancy. So not viable at all. So it had to be terminated. So I went through that process. It was a very sad, very scary, and very painful experience. They actually, if you ever deal with this or if you've gone through it, you kind of know how it goes. They usually give you two options. You can take the medication and pass it home, or you get like a surgical removal done, which is what I had to do because of it being in the fallopian tube. They just wanted to make sure that they were able to get all of it so that there were no complications. So I had to do it in office as a surgical procedure. And you have to go through all of these different steps and stages, and there's a lot that goes into it. So first you have to talk with a counselor, and then she goes over, your options, what medicine you can take. She's basically just like going through all of these questions. And I remember completely just dissociating through that whole thing and just saying yes, 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 and signing whatever papers I needed. And then they do an ultrasound. And I think I remember this being sort of a monumental part of like, wow, I think I could want this one day, is when they finally found like the sac, because at this point it was just the sac and like the egg or whatever. So when they found it and seeing it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that is actually like that's real, you know, not viable, but it's real. And that's when it kind of shifted of like, this is something that I would want one day, I think. Like I was almost, even though it was sad, and I was sad and kind of stressed, and I had a mix of emotions, honestly. I remember feeling like a joy overall, like seeing the ultrasound and them explaining everything, and I was like, wow, like this is really cool and like something that I think that I could want one day. So that's the main reason everything shifted for me. And ever since then, I've had this longing to be a mom. And it's been really interesting to have such a sudden shift in my thought process because of that. And like down to the point where like I'll have like these really, really descriptive, intense dreams. So like for instance, I always joke to Dion is like my dream life. I like I have a child, because I dream about her so often. But recently, I had a dream that like Dion and I had a baby, and I felt the entire labor process. Like mind you, I've never gone through labor, so I don't know exactly what it feels like. But my subconscious basically made up what they thought it would feel like, I guess. And I remember waking up like in that position of giving birth, and I like felt the pressure in my abdomen, like everything. Like I felt everything, you know, physically. And then the next night, I remember having a dream about coming home from the hospital with the baby, and I was so in love with this baby, so in love with this baby. My family and friends were at the house, and every time somebody would hold her, I'd be like, "Where's my baby? Give me my baby!" Like I didn't want to be without her. And specifically this moment, like I was breastfeeding her and I could feel what it would feel like, I guess, to breastfeed. Like I felt everything in my chest, all the way down to like the milk moving and, you know, the suckling, and then like making eye contact with this baby in my dream and waking up and being sad that that wasn't like my actual life. And so, yeah, there's been a huge shift, because I never would have thought that I would be at that point. And now I can definitely see myself being a mom, and I would love to have a family with Dion. And yeah, that's something that I look forward to maybe being able to experience one day. And even if I can't have a biological child, like at least I know now that I can get pregnant in some form or fashion. Hopefully, if we try, it goes a little bit more smoother. Um, but I've also considered adoption. I think I would be fine with adoption. You know, I have made the decision. Like, I know there's never like a right perfect time to have a child, but when it is my time and that time comes, I'm okay with either. I just know that at some point in my life, I do want to be a mom, and that kind of makes me excited because I've lived majority of my life like thinking that that was never going to happen. So it's very interesting to see like such a huge shift in my mindset, honestly.
So we didn't really talk about this in episode 1, but you and Dion have been together for about 6 years, about the same amount of time as me and Colby. And so when you were in the mindset of like, I'm not going to have kids, is kind of like when you guys started dating. And so I would assume that you guys were kind of on the same page, you know, in that regard. Like, I'm assuming somewhere over the last like 5 years, you guys had some conversations about it. So like, how did he feel before this happened? And then like, kind of, how does he feel now? Like, has he always wanted kids, or like, kind of, I guess, I know you're not him, but like, can you, y'all have probably had these conversations. So can you explain a little bit about like what his mindset is like?
Yeah, definitely. So he's always said that like he would love to be a dad. He didn't have his dad growing up at all. Um, Not to like spill all of his, you know, past traumas, but his dad died at a really young age and he wasn't close with his dad at all, like at all. So he didn't have that father figure growing up. So he's always said that he's he would he would love to be a dad. Like he would be okay with that. But ultimately, and this is why like I adore him so much, because he really understands like the power of choice for a woman, I guess. And he basically said, it's up to you. Like, I'm okay either way. But if you don't ever want to have kids, that's your choice, and that's fine, because I'm not going to be carrying the baby, or he's not going to be carrying the baby, is like what he was saying. And if I do decide, then that's okay too, you know. And I think that put me at ease almost, because I know a lot of men, when they get to a certain point, like, they do want to be fathers, they do want to have family, and they want that badly. And even though he probably, maybe he does or whatever, he's always said that it's up to me, and that's really nice. So his mindset is sort of whatever I want will do, which is nice, I guess. Oh, I hear a baby.
I was about to say, I know you can probably hear Declan. Colby! Colby! Yeah, he's crying for me.
Speaking of kids, real life hits. If you're a mom, I guess you know this.
Can you say hi? No?
No, that's fine. I was like talking about it. I was like, I feel like this time last year, like, hearing kids scream or like cry or whatever, I'd be like, oh, I'm so glad, But now I'm kind of like, oh, like, it's weird, the shift. Like, I feel like my maternal instinct is in like full mode, if that makes sense, Whereas like literally a year ago, it was not.
Do you want to go do Paw Patrol? With those? Okay, you can go do Paw Patrol. Sorry, I don't remember exactly what you were saying about Dion.
No, that's okay. I think this is completely irrelevant to what we're talking about.
Talking about kids.
Basically just saying that, like, yes, I have changed my mind since not wanting to have kids, and I definitely do. I feel that maternal instinct. And biologically, I don't know if, like, my body's being like, hey, girl, if you don't do it now, running out of time, I don't know if that's what it is or what, but I definitely feel way different than I did. And it's almost like exciting. And what's cool too is, I think when I think about having kids, like, it's more of like, it's not me being like, oh, I just want to have kids. Like, I want to be a mom. I want to have kids. It's like, I want to be a parent, like, versus just, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's like, oh, not me saying like I want kids. It's like, I want to parent a child. Like, I want to be a parent, I want to raise somebody that is a reflection of the love that I feel and like what I've learned. And yeah, I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I feel that a lot. Like, obviously I didn't go into having kids with that mindset, but after the decision of having kids, then I definitely got that same mindset of like, I need to make sure I do things differently. I'm very conscious of like my parenting choices and what they mean for our kids, and their growth and their mental stability and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I can definitely understand that. Okay, so you said that Dion is okay either way. Do you think he's a little more excited now that you've kind of made the decision? Like, was it so? Like, for me, I know in episode 1 we talked about like the whole abortion thing, and my mom, she didn't give me, like, it was whatever you want the whole time, like whatever you want. But I know as soon as I made the decision not to do it, she got really excited. And like, so then I knew like, okay, this is what she wanted the whole time. She just wouldn't tell me because she was trying to respect my decision. So do you think that's kind of how it is with Dion? Like, is he a little more excited, like once you guys get married, maybe you guys can start trying or whatever?
What's funny is, like, so when I found out that I had gotten pregnant, he was super excited. And I was like, opposite emotion. I was scared. I was crying, like a complete opposite emotion. But as soon as he saw me upset, he shifted. But I could tell that he was excited at first because he was like, oh my God, that's awesome. And then he came to the bathroom and I'm like bawling. I don't know. I can't explain the emotion that I felt. It was just weird. It was overwhelming. But now I'm like, get me pregnant. Like, I'm like, I want to get pregnant. Get me pregnant. He's like, no, let's wait. Let's like figure stuff out first. Let's get married. And I'm kind of just like, I knew you were excited.
And yeah, when me and Cole made the decision to have a second kid, like, I feel like we both, like when we had the initial conversation, we were both very like, okay, I think we're at a point where we can have another kid. Everly is like 5 and I don't want her to be too much older before we decide to start over and this and that. So we had made the decision, but then when it came time to like try, it was like 1 month I would be super excited expecting to like have a positive test. And then, he would be so nervous and then it would be negative and then I would be really sad. And then he would be like, whew. And then like I'm like, well, why are you relieved? Like I thought we were ready. And then like the next month he would be like, oh, this is the month. Like I'm pretty sure you're pregnant. And then like I would just be like, kind of in like an emotional slump or something from like, because it was kind of a roller coaster. Like this first few months of like trying, like because I would be excited and then it would be negative, and then like I'd be excited and it would be negative. So like there were certain points where like I wouldn't even get my hopes up because I was expecting it to be negative, and then that's when he would be like, no, now it's going to be positive. And honestly, I didn't actually end up getting pregnant until we both kind of like, I don't want to say we weren't trying, because we were like mentally trying to have a kid, but like we went on vacation and like, we just kind of were carefree in that moment. And I'm like 99.9% sure like that's when it ended up happening, is because like we just both weren't, I feel like the stress of trying to get pregnant makes such a difference for so many women. So I think that we kind of went through that little roller coaster too. Even though we were both on the same page about wanting another kid, we were never, our emotions during that time like never really lined up with one another. Like and that's how our whole life is really. Like we just really, one of us is up and one of us is down, and like we just kind of balance each other out, which works well.
So I have a question too. So I know you already have kids and stuff, but like, do you plan to have more kids? Like, what's your thought on that? Or like, what do y'all think, or what do you want? Or is 2 enough?
2 is plenty. 2 is plenty. So we have come to the decision to not have any more kids. And where we are on that mentally, 99% of the time we're both like we're absolutely done. 2 is a lot. And like I said, like in episode 1, we only have like a year and some change, a year and a half, I guess, of like paying for daycare still. And Declan is fully potty trained, so we don't have diapers anymore. Like so much of our expenses are like that come with having like a small child are kind of like going away, and like he's more independent, and like we kind of have that ability to like leave the kids with their grandparents for a weekend and take like a weekend vacation if we want to, or whatever. So starting over, like just the thought of that is so much in and of itself. But there's a lot that goes into us deciding to not have any more kids. And Colby is scheduled to have his surgery in like 6 weeks. So it's kind of like a final decision for us. And granted, when he texted me like 2 weeks ago and told me, like, he was like, I have a doctor's appointment. So I was like, fine, whatever. Like I was working from home, or I think I was sick that day, or I don't remember, but I was at home and he texted me and he just sent me like a date. And I was like, what is that? Like, I was like, I thought I forgot something, or I don't know. I was just like, what is that? And he was like, my procedure. And I was like, oh, I was like, that's the appointment that you just went to? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I kind of had like mixed emotions. Like I was like, okay, like this is real. Like we're really not going to have any more kids. And I told him, like, when he got home, I was like, I kind of felt sad about it at first. So like, maybe we shouldn't. But then like, anytime I think specifically, like if I only think the thought, I'm not going to have any more kids, it makes me sad. But then when I think more, like when I think more into what it takes to have a kid, then I'm like 100% like, I can't do that again. Because like mostly because of my mental health. My mental health plays a huge part in why I made the decision that I don't want to have any more kids. Colby's decision is more like, he's older than me. So he's like, I don't want to be well into my 50s still raising kids. I want us to be able to travel at that point and like enjoy, the life that we've worked really hard for, and this and that. And then, there's those sorts of things, money and like all those sorts of things more are like the reason. And he's like, we have a boy and we have a girl, and like, that's perfect. And I feel like that's kind of the mindset that a lot of guys have, is like, once you have one of each, then you're kind of like, okay, cool. For us as women, like there's so much that goes into it. And so I know I talked a lot about like my mental health as far as in pregnancy and all that stuff going in. And like for me, in order to have another kid, like I would have to come off of my medication.
You can't take medication while you're pregnant?
You can take certain ones, but the one that I'm on, I can't take. So I would have to, like, if I accidentally got pregnant, like right now, I would just have to come off of it, I think, because I don't think that any doctor would start me on a new one, like if I was already pregnant. But if I was planning to get pregnant, like if I wanted to try to get pregnant, then I could make the decision now to like come off of this one and then maybe start one that's safer during pregnancy. Like, and then get that into my system well enough to be on it during a pregnancy, you know, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. I'm looking up if I can take Lexapro if I'm pregnant, because that changes shit. Yeah, I can. It says you can. Okay.
But yeah, so certain medications, like I would have to come off of it. I would, that in and of itself is like the biggest thing for me, because like I said, my pregnancy with Declan was so hard on me mentally. Another reason why Colby has kind of made this decision is because like I had a lot of complications in my birth with Declan. And so like there was a point where like Colby thought I was about to die, and that was so like traumatizing for him that he was just like, I don't ever want to experience that again.
What?
Yeah, I just like, my blood pressure was like incredibly high. So they ended up inducing me. And then I was in labor for like 24 hours, because induction is just so hard on your body. And so I was in labor for like 24 hours. And by the time I had him, I was just so, I don't know if it was like the exhaustion or like my blood pressure going down once I had him, or I really don't know. But they had given me like some pain meds to kind of like ease some of the pain. Like they gave me some IV pain meds before I had him. And so I was so tired by the time he decided to come that like pushing just, it literally just took everything out of me. I'd been up for like 24 hours straight. I was in so much pain. Then when they gave me the pain meds, then I just wanted to relax and sleep, but I couldn't because there was a baby coming out of me. And so then I was like, pushing is so exhausting. And I don't remember, like, I don't remember a lot of it. But I remember I just couldn't breathe. Like I just like, they ended up putting me on like oxygen and all of this stuff. And I don't really remember those first moments of like Declan coming out, because I was like, I don't know, like about to pass out, or I don't really know. And so Colby was super panicked. And I remember, it's so funny because I remember him crying. And I thought in that moment, he was crying because like it's his first child being born, and like it's a beautiful moment. And I remember telling him this like after, like when I was in recovery afterwards, and I was like, it was so cute, like you crying, like it was so like sweet and emotional. It's one of those things that you think you're going to experience when you have a baby, you know, with your husband. And so I told him this, and he was like, no. He was like, I was crying because I thought you were dying, and I thought you were about to leave me, and I don't know how to take care of a baby. And like, I was so scared. And so I think that story is so funny, because I definitely thought he was crying because it was like this beautiful moment. And he was just like, no, I was scared shitless. And like, I had no idea what I was going to do if you left, like if you died. And so, yeah, he's like, I never want to experience that again. And, so that was like another thing for him. But for me, like the mental, emotional, and physical, like I'm at a point now where I'm finally like taking my health, like my physical health, seriously. And so I would have to, not necessarily have to stop, because you can be active while you're pregnant, but it would definitely kind of go in the opposite direction, right? Like I'd put on like another X amount of pounds from carrying a baby, and then my body would be stretched out again, and all these things. So for me, it's somewhat selfish, I guess, but like we talked about in episode 1, like in an okay way. Like I've had kids, I don't feel obligated to have any more. And so I think that I'm at a point now where like I've done what I feel called to do. Like I've had Everly, I've had Declan. I feel like they're perfect. They're both healthy, and I don't know, I get terrified. I came across a story, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago now. I don't remember what state it was in, but it was like, it was all over the news, I think. And it was that woman who had been like a labor and delivery nurse.
Oh, Lauren Clancy. Yeah.
Yes. With the whole, like, she just kind of went psycho after her third kid and then like murdered her children. And I'm not saying that like that, like, I'm not saying that's going to be me. But when I think about my mental health and where it was with my last pregnancy, and the postpartum and all of that. Like for me, I'm not going to say if I had another kid that my child wouldn't be worth every single trial that I had to go through to get them. But I don't know that I willingly want to go through that again and take a chance on becoming like on suffering from postpartum psychosis.
I think that's really smart. I think that's really smart just because, yeah, like I think that's smart. That's all I have to say about that. That's smart. I think that's a really good decision because you are understanding that your pregnancy triggered a lot of those emotions and you want to be able to give what you can, like to the children that you have now. And if adding an additional child to that, like, lessened your ability to function as, a mom, a wife, and whatever, I think it's like, it's not worth it,
And I think I do receive like a good bit of judgment. Like I said in episode 1, I think some of that is from and grandparents. Like my mom and them are a little bit different because my mom and them have like my brother and my sister-in-law, they have 2 kids, and then we have 2 kids, and then my other 2 brothers are both unmarried, but capable of potentially in the future giving them more grandkids. So for them, they've made comments here or there about like, when are you going to have another one, especially before we had Declan. But they're few and far between from them. But my mother-in-law, on the other hand, I feel like because my husband, she has 3 boys. So she has Colby, and then she has Colby's brother who is handicapped, and then she has another son who has made the decision. He made the decision very early on not to have any kids. And so Colby's really the only one of her kids that can give her grandkids. And so for us, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on like, when are you going to have more kids? When are you going to have more kids? And like I said, they help us a ton with the 2 kids that we have. But they don't, because they have Colby's brother who's also handicapped and like living at home and, requires care and whatnot. Like, it's already hard for them to get both of the kids that we have at the same time. They typically like alternate, like they'll get Everly one night and then Declan another night during the week or whatever. So they don't get them both at the same time. And I'm like, well, could you imagine having to like have another kid in that mix? Then you'd basically have a kid like every day of the week, if you're trying to alternate, or, it would be, if you tried to keep them all at once for Colby and I to go on a trip or something, like it would be so much for you guys to have to handle. So for me, I try to like remind people of that. Like when, it's like, when are you guys going to have another kid? And I'm like, well, there's so much that goes into it. It's not just, hey, I want another little baby to hold and love on. It's like, it's a whole nother person for a whole nother 18 years.
Yeah. Well, because that's what it is for them. I mean, like, I know that you said grandparents and I know grandparents do take care of children, but I feel like it's easy because that's kind of what it is for maybe grandparents. It's like, it is another baby to love and hold on, and, you can give them back. Like, it's not the nitty gritty every day.
So I think that, we've received some judgment on like that front, as far as like the grandparents being upset that like, we're not going to have any more kids. And then also from Everly, but from Everly in the sense of, she wants us to have another kid so bad, and she wants to have like a little sister, and she's finally at an age where she loves loving on babies. Like, she loves helping. And so, we have a good friend who just found out that she's pregnant, and Everly's like mama birding her so bad, like, be careful. She's like, be careful. Don't do that. Like, don't do. And she's like, girl, I've had 3 kids. I know what I can and can't do. And Everly's like, yeah, but be careful. And so she wants me to have another kid so bad. And it's hard because she doesn't physically, like scientifically know how babies are made. And so, she's under this, and I agree with this mentality that she has, that like, it's up to God. And I do agree with that. But every time we tell her like we're not having more kids, she's always like, well, you don't get to decide that. And so now we're finally like explaining to her, well, like, yes, I know what you're saying, and that's true, but people can also make a decision to have certain like surgeries where their body can't carry a baby anymore. And so we've kind of had those conversations. She doesn't understand because she doesn't understand that it takes a dad. Like, you know what I'm saying? So when she thinks about the surgeries and stuff, she really only thinks about like the women. So I feel like it's going to be hard for her to understand if she doesn't see me have a surgery that she's not going to understand. Like, yeah. So anyways, so we go through the emotions of her being upset every time we mention like not having any more kids. And then also just like people around us. Like I don't feel judgment when I tell people that I'm not having more kids specifically, but when I go into the reasoning, especially people who don't suffer from mental illness, I feel like I get judgment when I explain to them like that it's not, I hate saying that it's not worth it, but like it's not something I voluntarily want to do, is to like put myself through all of that mental stuff again and like physical and whatever. And I feel like especially with people who either have struggled with infertility or know people who are close to them that have struggled with infertility, I feel like there's a lot of like silent judgment, if that makes sense, of like that I'm selfish. But I don't feel like I am. Like I have two beautiful, healthy kids, and I don't feel like just because my body is able to have more kids that I'm obligated to do it.
Say it again. That is the biggest thing. Yes, because I feel very passionate about this, and I could go on a rant, but I'm not going to, because I don't want this to become a political thing. But I definitely think that part of the reason is because I don't know what it is. Women are seen as like vessels for these for children, you know, like we're not seen a lot of the time as anything else. And I hate that. Just because we're able doesn't mean it's an obligation. And I feel like we're finally getting into an era where women are accepting that and like really, really living their lives that way. And I think that that's wonderful and perfect.
Have you ever watched the show? What is it called? I think it's called like
Handmaid's Tale?
Yes. I don't know why. Like I started watching I only watched like maybe season 1 and part of season 2, but I don't know what it is, because I wasn't in the mindset of not having any more kids when I started that show, but there was something about that show that was so triggering for me. I couldn't finish it because of that. Like everybody's like, "Oh, the new season's coming out and it's so good." But like that was one of the hardest shows for me to watch. Like the fact that like they use women for breeding, and then any woman who can't have kids is basically like, if they're not part of this like married rich class, then they're like disposed of. Or like used, what are they? Like they were used as basically like slaves or servants, I guess. And I'm like, that's insane.
Yep. And the fact that it's like true, kind of like that actually happened.
Yeah, that show was insane to me. I couldn't imagine if the world actually worked that way. But I'm glad that more women are coming like to a point where they're okay saying like, I don't want to have kids, or like I don't want to have more kids or whatever, because and it does get sad every once in a while. Like I'll see a cute little outfit at Walmart or something, like just doing my normal like just getting stuff out of the house or like whatever, and especially Target is so triggering. Target has the cutest baby stuff. So there are times where like I'll see stuff and I'll be like, oh my gosh, or I'll see all over, like I feel like it goes through like phases where everybody on my feed has a baby at the same time or finds out they're pregnant at the same time. And again, it's that Instagram reel. Like I will forget how not true it is when I look at it on my phone. You know what I'm saying? Like if that makes sense. Like I will look at my phone and see somebody announce that they're pregnant in the cutest way, or they'll post a newborn picture and I'm like, oh my gosh, babies. And my brain will just momentarily forget that there's so much more that goes into it. So when I get in those moments, I am like, oh, maybe I do want another baby. But then I think about like all of the other things. And I don't know how to explain that. In a sense that makes sense. For anybody that hasn't really been through it. Because I know a lot of people who struggle with infertility, or I hear a bunch of stories about people who struggle with infertility, and I feel so, I don't want to say bad, but I can't imagine. I mean, I went through like a few months, probably like 3 or 4 months of just like when we were trying for Declan and the disappointment I felt when those tests became negative. And I already had a kid, but I know people that are like that too, that have a kid and then later try for another kid and then can't get pregnant. So it's not a one, like you either can or can't have kids. It's each situation is different, and each pregnancy is different. And I think that it's one of those things where, like we were talking about in episode 1, where it's like I want to be able to be confident and secure and somewhat empowered, I guess, by my decision to not have any more kids. But I feel like I can't feel all of those things without also feeling guilt for all the people who can't have kids. And I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know why we can't just be okay with our decisions without worrying about like what other people are going to think or what other people are going to feel. And it's again one of those things that I know we've talked about before about not being responsible for other people's feelings. But it's also sad because it's like I feel like I can't meet somebody else who is maybe struggling with infertility and I don't want to say celebrate, but them be okay with my decision, if that makes sense. Like, let's say like you couldn't have kids. If like it was just, maybe in high school you had to have both fallopian tubes or whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you and I couldn't, I don't feel like even in today's like time, like I don't feel like you and I could be sitting here having the same conversation and me saying I'm okay with never having kids and then you be okay with that. Like I feel like I can't go out and have a conversation with somebody who struggles with infertility and them ever be okay with me making the decision to not have kids because I'm capable. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where it's like you can, like let's say you're a single friend, because I feel like this is another thing that I feel like is kind of common. Like let's say you're the single friend and you've been in all of your friends' weddings. You've been a part of all of them and you see everybody getting married and getting happy, but you're just miserable and single and you're like, oh, I'm never going to meet anybody and that's never going to be me. I'm always going to be the bridesmaid and never the bride. You get to a point where it's hard to celebrate your friends the way that you should. Like this is one of the happiest moments of their life. And it's hard for you to celebrate them in the way that they deserve because you're stuck in your own feelings and emotions of it's not happening for me. Does that make more sense?
It makes sense. It makes sense. And I definitely understand like where you're coming from for sure. And either I'm an asshole or I'm really good at compartmentalizing. I don't know. But like the older that I've gotten, and like it's empathize. Like I'm not saying don't. I think that human nature is for us to empathize with those people. And I think we can do that and also celebrate ourselves. Me, for instance, like kind of the scenario you gave earlier, I wouldn't think of it that way. Like if I couldn't have kids and you were saying that you didn't want them, like that has nothing to do with me. It doesn't affect me whatsoever. Like that's your decision and I would be fine with that. Like I think the people who can't compartmentalize, that's their own issue. And I know that it's sad, but like there shouldn't be any judgment coming from that. Like, and you should feel empowered to talk about it. Like I said, you can do it with empathy. You could be tactful about it and you can come from a place of understanding. And, I feel like it's kind of like a little bit with grief too. Like if somebody has just lost someone, you're not going to not live your life, like just because they've lost someone too, but you can choose to let them sort of bring the conversation up. It can be something that you don't talk about, but especially if it's your friends, like I specifically like with the marriage stuff, like before I was engaged and like even now, like all of my friends are married and I love to celebrate that like wedding and all of the events so much because I love these people and like I know that my time will come and yeah, sometimes it makes me sad, but like I 100% I'm like, okay, that's my own issue. I'm going to celebrate these people because this is their day. This is their experience. And I'm very excited for them, just because I haven't had that yet or whatever. It's like, I don't know.
I wish there were more people that could separate out their emotions that way. I think it says a lot about you and like your maturity though that you're able to do that. I don't think that a lot of people are. Like I feel like I feel like almost anytime I have a conversation about not having kids, I feel like somehow there's like a conversation of like, I know somebody who can't have kids, or like, not like, I don't feel like they bring it up in like a jerkish kind of way. I think it's just like they naturally, their brain just goes there as to like, you're making this decision, but there's also people out there who are struggling. So I don't know. I think it's just the way society has kind of programmed our brains to think of like, to only think about the way that we feel. So I think it says a lot about you as well, that like you can just empathize even though you're struggling with your own stuff, and you don't, like, you're able to separate that out. So, one of my questions for you, even though you don't have kids yet, would be, when you do have kids, because we're going to speak that into existence, that you're going to have your little girl one day. When you have kids, what is one thing that you experienced as a child that you want to ensure that your children don't ever experience?
So, one big thing, I think, so I grew up with divorced parents. So, I feel like this is kind of specific to, I mean, I feel like it could be relevant to anybody, but I feel like living with divorced parents going back and forth, I was always in the middle of like really adult topics and conversations when I was really young. So, money, child support, like I was the middleman for that between my mom and dad. And I heard it from both sides. Like, my mom would send me to my dad's house to tell him, hey, mom wants her child support. And then my dad would give me the check and like say something about my mom and tell her, he'd be like, well, tell her, it's not late or whatever. And I don't know. I was just always in the middle. And then even growing up, and as like when I wasn't even that old. I was probably like 10, 11 or whatever. That's when my mom really started to confide in me about a lot of adult things. And she was going through a lot. She really was. But I was her confidant. I was the one that she unloaded emotionally on. And it was hard. Like, I was very aware of a lot of dark adult things at a really young age. And I feel like I lost my innocence a little bit. And even carries into now. I feel like that has it contributes a lot to some of my mental health issues and whatever else. And I don't ever want my kids to lose their innocence as far as that goes. Like, I don't want to be the reason that they are exposed to adult things before they need to be, I guess. And not in a sense of like keeping it from them or like guarding them too much and not being realistic about it. But like, they don't need to know about mom and dad's finances. They don't need to know that we're struggling. Yeah, they're not my therapist, and I want to guard them as much as possible.
And I can 100% relate to that, because I feel like I went through a lot of the same stuff with my divorced parents. I think that you probably experienced it more, mostly because A, you were the oldest, and B, like, you were the only one going back and forth between your mom and dad. Like, your younger siblings had a different biological dad, but then I know you spoke about this in the past, like, he wasn't around anymore for them. And then they had Greg step in and be that for them, but he lived with your mom and they were married. So you were the only one going back and forth and had to deal with the whole like child support thing and the bad talking of your dad and this and that. But I experienced that a lot too. I think that I took a lot more of it on than my brother did, because I've always just been more mature. And then also, like, just scientifically, girls mature a little bit faster than boys. So my brother just didn't care. And then I think that my mom could see that I cared about them bad mouthing each other and this and that. And so she would talk to me about child support, and then not just about my dad though. Like, she would talk to me about her financial struggles and how like she was struggling to pay bills, and she was working all these jobs and she was doing this. And then also like her relationships with men. She would just talk to me about why they broke up, or like she started talking to me about sex at such a young age. Like, and I'm not saying that young kids don't need to know what it is, because I think that there is a certain point where you should have age appropriate conversations with kids about what sex is, because they're introduced to it young at school. But she would talk to me about like her sex life at a young age, and I think that I always thought like that was so inappropriate, and it became more evident to me how inappropriate it was as I began to like form like more friendships as I got older. And my friends would come over and hear my mom, and they'd be like, what did your mom just say? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's just how she is. And like, it was so abnormal for everybody else around me that I was just like, maybe it's not normal. And so, yeah, I was always exposed or like brought into adult conversations or adult conflict. And so I can 100% relate to that and agree that that's not something I want to pass on to my kids.
Yeah. Because they lose, or I mean, I feel like I lost a sense of innocence. And like, what makes it really sad too is like, I felt, because when you're young, like, I feel like you're like, oh, I want to do all the adult things. I want to do, you know what I mean? Like, I was almost honored that adults, it wasn't just my mom either. I would have adults like just spill their guts to me. And I thought that it was like a good thing. I'm like, oh, like I'm mature. These adults want to talk to me about their problems. And no, like I was just being emotionally dumped on as a child, even like 16, 17. I'm still considering myself a child. And I would be able to like hold conversations with these adults, not having any sort of experience in what they're talking about, but like, I don't know, just, I'm like, wow, like, realize that I do not want my kids to have to go through that. And adults shouldn't, there should be a level. Like, even if you're 17, 16 or whatever, like, still keep it as light, you know?
Yeah, I feel like there's a difference in explaining hard conversations to your kids when they come home with questions versus just what you said, like emotionally dumping. Because then I feel like it also teaches your kids to emotionally dump. And I know that I have grown up and had to relearn those behaviors, and I still struggle sometimes, but like I emotionally dump a lot. And I've built friendships that are solely surrounded around emotionally dumping. And then as I work through it on my own, then I'm like, man, I don't have a real friendship with this person because our whole friendship is just centered around emotionally dumping our baggage on each other. And that's not a real relationship. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think I don't want to repeat, and something that I think that more parents need to be like aware of. Like, your child is a child. And I feel like it goes more, or I feel like it happens more often with single parents. I feel like it happens, when you don't feel, when parents don't prioritize their own self-care, or have their own friends or partners to be that buffer for them, then they end up just unloading all that baggage onto their child because they feel like they're friends and connected. And I'm not saying that you can't feel like your child's friend in some regard, but I think that you need to break things down to like an age appropriate level. If your child comes home with questions, I don't think that you should just willingly just be like, oh, let me tell you about all my financial troubles or all my, whatever. So yeah, I agree with that.
So, what is one thing that you learned as a child? Basically the same question you asked me. What did you learn that you don't want your kids to experience in childhood?
I think that the biggest thing for me would be like feeling important. I guess I think growing up a lot, having a parent who was working all the time to try to like, build a career for herself. And then on top of that, like trying to, navigate the dating world and this and that. I felt like there was a lot of times where I felt like me and my siblings were just put on the back burner. And like, it felt like her relationships were always more important than us. And whereas I agree with kind of like the biblical like hierarchy of relationships where like your relationship with your spouse should be more important than your relationship with your kids, I want my kids to grow up learning that like, hey, I prioritize my relationship with your dad. Yes, like we have like a mutual respect and a mutual relationship, but like we love you guys 100%, like each and every day, and we want to spend as much time with you as possible. So like every once in a while, like we'll go on like a date night and Everly will be like, where are you guys going? And we'll tell her and she'll be like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, no kids allowed. Like, you're not invited. Like, we're going on a date. And she'll be like, oh. But then like she'll quickly turn around and be like, ooh, you're going on a date. Are you going to wear lipstick? And she'll like, because I typically only get like really dressed up if we're going somewhere nice. So she'll quickly like change her mindset. But it's always kind of shocking to her, like, we're not invited. Because we do spend so much of our time with them. Like we typically, anywhere we go, we bring them, or anytime we plan a trip, like we want our kids to go, and we just genuinely love spending as much time with them as possible. And even like when we're at home, like if the kids are awake, like we typically only have our alone time like once the kids go to bed, like whether it's alone time together or alone time individually. Like we wait until the kids are like asleep, and a big part of that is because I want them to feel like when they're here, like they're seen, and we want to spend our time with them. And there are definitely days where like I come home exhausted, or Colby comes home, mentally exhausted, and like we can't give 100%, but I feel like that's where the other one kind of picks up that where one of us is lacking at the time. And so, but I think that we do a lot, like Everly's getting to that point where she feels kind of annoyed by us sometimes. It's like she'll be in her room doing something, and like we'll just go like plop on her on the bed and be like, hey, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm coloring. And then we're like, well, lay with me, spend time with me. And Everly's like, go away. And so, but she's very like, physical touch is definitely her love language. So she typically doesn't push us away too often, but it does happen sometimes. Like she'll be like, no, I'm playing on my tablet. And I'm like, but love me, spend time with me. So I try to like go out of our way to like make her feel like I genuinely want to spend time with her. And I don't ever remember having that as a kid. Like I feel like my time was always like kind of a burden, because my mom just had so much going on. So I think that would be like the biggest thing that I don't want my kids to ever feel like they're not important enough for me to put everything else to the side, kind of. So
I love that. I love that.
Well, thank you guys for joining us for our topic on kids. We appreciate you guys listening, and we hope that you come back next week.
Yeah, hope to see you then.